Welcome to Pastor. I'm your host, Tim Reynolds, and we're glad that you joined us today. Have a guest with us this morning, and her name is Lauren Mora. And Lauren, tell us a little bit about yourself, would you?
Well, I am 27, will be 28 in October. I am married and will be married for 3 years this year. I have been born and raised in church. I currently have a new position I'm starting as a processor, but my past history has definitely been more customer service driven in the banking industry. So that's kind of more of my work level. And I have a love for my fur baby. I have a big golden doodle retriever at home. So
we all like our dogs.
Yeah.
Unless you're a cat person out there, and we'll give you grace today. But I've asked Lauren to come and share with us some of what she has went through. You know, she was, as she mentioned, she was raised in church. So she's been in church her whole life, basically been going to the same church. And there was a transition that took place. And I'm going to let Lauren share that. But where she left the church she was at and went to another, she can tell that story. But Lauren, tell us a little bit about the church you grew up in.
Well, I grew up in River of Life, which was then Larkwood, what most people know it as. Went there when I was 4, all the way up until I was about 22 years old. It has always been since we were there. I mean, it was pretty thriving, if that's what you want to say, when we first attended there. But after a couple of years, it did get a little bit smaller, and pretty much the chunk of my life that I was there, it was always small, which was never an issue because it was always constantly tight-knit. We were always very together, had close friendships, and it was just a great place of growth and people being able to pour into each other and encourage each other for sure.
Yeah, I know you had a great pastor there.
Yes, most definitely.
And he really sowed a lot into you and your family. But as you grew there, I understand there was a time that you felt like it was time for you to leave that church. Can you share with us what you went through in that time period?
Well, I guess I kind of want to first say that, you know, growing there, I don't think I would be who I am today as far as on a ministry level. You know, my pastor gave my opportunity to grow and worship. You know, I have a passion and desire for worship. And without that, I probably would never even think about singing on a stage. So I'm very grateful for that. And being there, like I kind of said in the beginning, it was very small. There was never youth there. There was never youth, young adult, my age ever. And as a child, you really don't realize what you're missing, I feel like. So that was always okay. I was happy with what I had. There was really never a whole lot of moments of like, oh, there's no one here for me. But as I got to be a teenager in high school and realizing, you know, I really want my friends and I want people to connect with, that wasn't there for me. And it just, there was definitely, we pursued to grow for sure, but for some reason that just was not there. So for me, it started with Wednesday nights. I actually would start attending a church that had youth there, my age, people that I could relate to and talk to on a different level than those that may be more wise and in their prime per se, you know, so that was just something I really needed. So I started that way. And then as time progressed, I just slowly transitioned into attending that church full time, Sunday and Wednesday. So.
And you were very active at that church as well in the music,
yes,
right?
Worship. Yeah, worship leader.
So what I'm hearing from you is you didn't leave the church you grew up in angry or upset with anything. You just felt that it was time for you to grow out away from the shadow of your mom and dad and some of the people that you grew up around.
Yeah, it was a very hard decision because for me, I'm very much about comfort. I was comfortable there. I knew there were people there that loved me. I loved them. So it was never an easy decision, and it had never had anything to do as a number of whole. Like, oh, there's only 50 people there. I don't want to be there. It was just about needing something a little more than what was able to be given to me, you know.
Yeah. And I know when you went to this church, some things happened in the good and has made you who you are today. Mm-hmm. And that's a young man that come into your life. So God orchestrated this to where you could meet your husband.
Absolutely.
Diego's a great guy, and we think a lot of him. So that's a plug for Diego today. But as you met him there, you didn't go looking for a husband at this church, right?
No, not at all. I actually, left my past church looking for friendships on people that, like I keep relating back to people my age, and so going there, I definitely got what I needed as far as friendships and us being able to minister to each other and pour into each other as well. And
now you're no longer at that church.
Correct.
And I know you're not a church hopper. You're not one that just goes from one church to the other. And I know pastors understand that term, church hopper. An individual, they go to a church for a little bit and then they just go to another one and another and another. And that's not you.
Right.
And it's not your husband. Now, Diego really wasn't raised in church growing up, was he?
Right. He was raised, quote unquote, Catholic, but they never really practiced that. Okay. He knew there was a God. His mom and dad continuously always told him, be thankful that you have what you have because of God. So they taught that to him in a sense. There was never any practice of the religion, I guess, if that's what you want to say. So I definitely think that was also a decision maker as far as transitioning from the smaller church into where we are now as well.
And, the first church that you were at, that you were raised at, was a healthy church. It wasn't an unhealthy church by no means. Matter of fact, I was your youth pastor for a little bit.
Yes.
And so when you transitioned to this other church, which was probably about, 15 miles from the church that you were attending, in the same city, Louisville, Kentucky. When you went there, things were happening. You were excited about what was going on. But through that time, there was some dynamics that changed, correct?
Yeah.
And some of your friends that were there when you started were no longer there.
Yes.
Okay. So share with us the transition. And, this isn't anything that a church has done bad or...
Right.
We want to help pastors be able to keep millennials like you.
Yeah.
And if we're missing the mark somewhere, we want to correct that. And I believe every pastor that listens to this program, they want to see their church grow. They want to see it improve. So what was some of the things that may have took you from the last church you were at to where you're at now? Now, you went from a small church to a little bigger church, but still a small church.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now you attend what I consider a mega church. I think they're number 10 in the nation as far as size, and that's Southeast Christian out of Louisville, Kentucky. And they have multiple campuses, correct?
Yeah, we're at one of the remote locations,
Okay. And big churches aren't bad either. Mega churches aren't bad. They're good for you that are listening, thinking, she's one of those that ran away to a mega church. What was some of the things that transitioned you from the previous church you were at to where you are now? And share, we've talked personally, but share some of the things that was that decision-making point for you.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the key things for both of us, my husband and I, was kind of communication from the ministry or from our pastor and those in leadership. There was a lot of things planned. There was word of changing the stage, getting lighting, getting chairs instead of pews, kind of the things that almost every church kind of goes through right now. It's just modernizing their look kind of. And so we did a lot of funding for that. It was in the works, we had the money to do it, but then once we had the money, there was no communication there on, okay, so are we doing it? And then also I felt like there was no idea of what the vision was. Every church, their vision is they want to grow. Our goal is to bring souls to the Lord, but in the end, how do we get there? We just felt like there was no, vision for that. And those goals set towards the church to know, okay, what's our first step to do that? It was constantly, we want to grow, but okay, so what do we do? we're just as lost of what our first step is to do in order to get there.
Okay.
So that was definitely one of the main things.
So definitely a church needs to have a clear vision and express that vision to everyone that's in the church, not just the older crowd, the older generation, but also a younger generation like you.
Yeah.
Right now you've been at Southeast for how long? 2 years?
Yeah, it'll be 3 this year.
Okay. So basically from the time that almost the time you got married, there was this transition that took place. Though you met Diego at the church that you were attending. And we've already clarified, Diego wasn't raised in church like you were. So there was this time where you felt like this was the healthiest thing for your family,
yes.
Correct?
Yeah, definitely.
Can you share a little bit about maybe what you were feeling there? Because as a pastor, when I see a young man that or a young lady that has never, they haven't spent their life in church, what could I do to maybe keep them engaged and keep them coming to the church that I pastor?
Part of that decision for us was, Diego had been going there a little bit longer than me. So he had kind of been there through the ups and now going in through the downs and trying to come back up, And so for us, and also for me on my heart, it was, because he wasn't raised in church and I was, like, church is church. Like I know when I should go, when I shouldn't go, things like that. And for him, I was just really afraid that, okay, if he's ready to move on and I'm not, then he may not go to church anymore. So that was just a transition where, okay, it's necessary. We need this change. So he made the change. And for him, as far as trying to keep millennials in church, and especially those that don't have a clue what church is like, things that he, really shared with me was just the structure of service, the flow, the different ways of preaching, teaching. He really enjoys the preaching, the excitement of, especially Church of God of Prophecy, Pentecostal. We tend to get a little more excited and loud, with our preaching, and he likes that. But, when we did, because we did go to Southeast on Saturdays, because they offer that. So we did do that before we actually made the change, and we just saw what their preaching was. And, he was just like, I like that they have a different, way of relaying the message without feeling like it's all about, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but like a hype, and not just so much of yelling and just calmly breaking it down, because for me, like I keep saying, I was raised in it. So I've heard some words that have been preached, 100 times in different ways. So you still kind of get a different way of understanding it. But for him, he's never heard it before, and for him, it being broken down and being taught like that, and not in a sense of a classroom, because they still, preach in a sense, but it was just a better understanding of the word,
So it's something that he's able to apply to his life a little easier, applicable. Understanding. And so you did this, this move took place to strengthen your family. Now, I know as a pastor, there's a lot of times we think, well, the mega church, they're out to destroy the small church. Did they pursue you guys? Did they come after you? Did they say, oh, you need to come to church here? Did you feel pulled by them to go to the church that you're at now?
Personally, I would say no. But I also feel like that was kind of our decision, not even really realizing we made that decision, because when you go in, there's immediately, depending on what location, anywhere from 10 to 20 people greeting you at the door, making you feel welcome. And there's just this presence when you walk in. I mean, seriously, when I first went, I was like, oh my goodness. You just felt the Spirit of the Lord there and the joy that you felt when you walked in. And I think, and I don't mean to be off topic, but I think that's one thing with the bigger church. I don't know if this is a bad or good thing, but you don't know every little thing going on in the church. In your smaller churches, sometimes a little more than you need to know. And that makes it really heavy on your heart.
Sure.
So going in somewhere, it was like a a breath of fresh air per se. But as far as them pursuing us, they, when you walk in, they greet you, and they every Sunday they let you know, hey, we have a visitor's card there. Every Sunday, they tell you that, even though you've heard it 100 times, in case there's another visitor, they tell you it's there. We didn't fill that out. We just never did. It wasn't like, oh, we don't want them to bother with us. We just never filled one out. I do know that when you do fill them out, that they do reach out to you, and it's not in a way of like, come back, come back, come back. They just make sure that your experience was good and that they would love to see you again. So, all
right. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Because as I stated, a lot of times we think that the mega church is the Walmart mentality.
Yeah.
To shut down the little guys.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's just a misconception that a lot of times we small pastors have. Mm-hmm. I don't believe the mega church is out to destroy the small church. Right. They have a place just like a small church has. Now, we've talked and you've shared with me that you're missing some things about the small church. What are some of those things?
I think the key thing is fellowship. And one thing about a bigger church, it is definitely work on your part. Because in a smaller church, there's not as many people. I mean, smaller, bigger, it's just that simple. When you walk in a bigger church, it is so easy to get lost in the crowd. And I don't want to be lost in the crowd. I've always been involved. My parents are true servants. I mean, seriously, they do everything they can. So I was raised that way as well. And it's on my heart to want to be involved and get to know people and serve. So I definitely miss that. But I don't say that in a way that that's not there at Southeast, but it is really 100% on you to get that out of a bigger church. They don't know your talents. They don't know your heart, because so many people, it's literally impossible, where with the smaller church, that was just something that it is just so much easier to connect,
But in a large church, you have to engage.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And if you don't, you're just another number in the seat for sure.
And, you're a very talented young lady. God's gifted you with a voice. You are, I believe, a worship leader. And that opportunity, is it there in the big church for you?
I talked to my husband a lot about this. I don't feel like it is. And I don't say that it couldn't be, because I believe that if this is what God had for me, that he would make a way. But I do know that for them, you do have the opportunity to, I guess you say, try out for the worship team, because they do have an interview process, because they don't just want any willy-nilly up there helping with worship.
Sure. You're talking thousands of people.
Yes, absolutely. And so as far as helping on the worship team, it's definitely an opportunity. For me, it's a personality thing, putting myself out there, having that fear of rejection. But as far as a worship leader, they're pretty, they want that full experience. Like, you've had years of experience, possibly had any type of background of college with your biblical side of it all. So it's a little harder. And I feel like what they're looking for may not be just someone that was raised up in it and grew on my own. And like I said, not that they wouldn't take an opportunity to let someone like that do that, but it just doesn't feel like something like that would be something I could have there.
Sure. And we've already mentioned they have multiple campuses, and those are different sizes. Yeah. So it's not that you're in church with 2,000-3,000 people every Sunday. So the campus you attend, what they run, 300-400, is that? Maybe.
And we currently have 3 different services, and that just started. So now there's quite a more, less of a crowd, because they're taking advantage of the earlier services.
Mm-hmm. So I'm finding that the mega churches are realizing the small concept of a church is important.
Yeah.
And I believe that's why a lot of these mega churches are opening other campuses. And they're having smaller services. So there is an importance of a small church.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
And I'm so glad you shared with us today. Yeah. And I guess my final question is, looking back on everything that you've went through, the transitions that you've made, was there anything in that maybe a pastor could have done that could have changed your mind in going to the mega church? Is there anything that could have been done where you would have remained at the church you were at?
I think that my experience where the lump sum of my time was spent was at River of Life. There's really nothing that they could have changed. I don't know exactly why we weren't able to grow a whole lot. We definitely had people come in and out of the church like anyone else. So I don't feel like there was a lot of anything that my pastor specifically could have done that I felt. I do feel like, the older you get, the more you realize what's going on around you, the more you start to really care. Not that I didn't care as a kid, but you just don't. Those aren't your worries. You don't think about, hey, there's not a lot of people here. Now, where I'd left recently to go to a larger church, there just wasn't much of a relationship there with my pastor and myself and my pastor and a lot of other people. It really felt like his concerns was more with the older generation, because that is where most of the ties were coming from. And I don't want to feel like that's what it was, but that's how it felt. I think that was more of it all, not even the tie situation. It's just that relationship. Like, we weren't being heard. And there was no time set aside to sit down and talk with us on that and relate to us and hear us out. And altogether, just relationships as a whole, the unity of the church wasn't really there. I didn't feel like, we had youth on one side and the older generation on the other, and that was every service. We were always separated. Not that you have to be intermingled, but you could just tell there was like this line in between both generations.
So what would have helped was more of a unity within the whole church.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Not a separation of generations.
Yeah.
Which a lot of times that automatically happens.
Oh, yeah.
But as pastors, we've got to work hard to bring those 2 or 3 or 4 generations, how many ever you have, together. And that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm a firm believer that God's got you on this path that you're on, you and Diego. And He's blessing you. You're learning from all this.
Yeah, definitely.
And small churches don't turn you off, do they?
No, they don't.
Okay.
No.
You love the small church pastor. So maybe God's got you here for a time, for a season to learn, to grow, to be able to plant back into maybe a smaller congregation.
Yeah.
And you just never know what God's got up His sleeves.
No kidding.
But Lauren, I thank you for giving me your time today.
You're welcome.
I hope this has helped somebody that's listening to understand, when an individual leaves their church, it's not necessarily because you're a bad pastor.
Right, exactly.
It's not because you did something horrible that's ran them off. But sometimes God moves people for reasons. He moved you the first time, I believe, so that you met the man that you're married to.
Yeah.
I really believe that. And you learned in that process, great pastor there. Mm-hmm. Both churches that you've been at have had great pastors.
I agree.
And, do we have things we got to work on? Absolutely. There's things that we can all improve in. Even the pastor where you're at now. Yeah. There's things I'm sure that he can grow in. So, again, I thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
And for sharing with us today. And if you're listening, which if you're at this point in the podcast, I know you've listened, give us some feedback. Give us a review of our podcast. Let us know what you're thinking. We've got some episodes coming up. I'm about to do an interview with some pastors on pastors and depression, how to deal with depression as a pastor. A lot of times as pastors, we may hide that we're going through something. Nobody knows but us and maybe our spouse and God. And these are things that are real today. We hear more today of pastors that are taking their life. And what a sad thing, what a tragedy that is. But it's real. So we're going to have some guest pastors in the future that we're going to be talking about this subject. And we want you to tune in to us, like us, follow us on Facebook. Let us know what you're thinking. If you have any ideas that you would like us to discuss, let me know. I'm always looking for good topics. And we'll see you next time on Pastor to Pastor.